The sound of gunfire shattered the peaceful dawn, and Nora Vance's life changed forever on that crisp autumn morning in 1878. Her husband's body lay sprawled across their homestead's porch, blood seeping into the wooden planks as her 6 children huddled behind her skirts. They hadn't even been in White River, South Dakota, for a full year, and now she was alone in this unforgiving frontier with 6 hungry mouths to feed and winter approaching fast. 3 days after burying James, Nora stood at his grave, her worn leather boots sinking into the freshly turned earth. The children waited by the wagon. John, almost 15 and trying desperately to stand tall like his father, Emma, 13 and already mothering her younger siblings. The twins, Sarah and Samuel, 9 years old and rarely separated, little Abigail, just 6 and confused about why Papa wouldn't wake up, and baby Thomas, barely 3, who still called for his father in the night. "I don't know how we'll survive," she whispered to the crude wooden cross, wiping tears from her wind-chapped cheeks. Their small ranch was mortgaged to the bank in Rapid City, the crops needed harvesting, and their few cattle required tending before winter set in. James had been everything: farmer, rancher, protector. Now he was gone, killed by rustlers who'd taken half their stock in the night. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Nora stiffen. She turned, shielding her eyes against the setting sun, to see a lone rider approaching from the west. His broad-shouldered silhouette was unmistakably that of a working cowboy, and something about the easy way he sat his horse spoke of confidence without arrogance. "Madam," he called, slowing his chestnut gelding as he neared. "Didn't mean to intrude on your grief." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair the color of wheat and eyes as blue as the Dakota sky. "Name's Yates Porter. I'm foreman at the Triple Bar Ranch just north of here." Nora straightened her back, one hand still resting on James's grave. "Mrs. Nora Vance," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. Was my husband, James." Yates Porter nodded solemnly. "I heard what happened. The whole county's talking about those rustlers. Sheriff's got a posse tracking them toward the Black Hills." He cleared his throat. "I came by your place first, but your boy said I'd find you here." "What business do you have with us, Mr. Porter?" Nora asked, suddenly aware of her tear-stained face and dusty black dress. "I rode by your homestead yesterday," he explained, dismounting and standing respectfully at a distance. "Saw your fields needed harvesting and your remaining cattle were scattered." He twisted the brim of his hat in his hands. "My boss, Mr. Henderson, sent me to offer our help. He knew your husband, madam." Nora's pride warred with practicality. The children needed to eat, and she couldn't possibly manage everything alone. "That's very kind, but we can't afford to pay for help right now." Yates shook his head. "Not asking for payment. Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we all survive." His eyes, kind but direct, met hers. "With respect, Mrs. Vance, those crops won't wait, and neither will winter." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. "The children and I will manage," she insisted, though the quaver in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "I don't doubt your determination, madam," Yates said, his voice gentle, "but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered honestly." As they spoke, the children had grown restless by the wagon. Little Thomas had begun to cry, and Emma was trying to comfort him while John looked on anxiously. Nora sighed. "You're right, Mr. Porter. We would be grateful for any assistance your ranch can provide." That evening, Nora sat at her kitchen table after the children were asleep, calculating what little money they had left and how long it might last. The sound of boots on the porch made her start. She opened the door to find Yates Porter, hat in hand. "Pardon the late hour, Mrs. Vance. I've been thinking about your situation." He gestured to the 2 men behind him. "These are some of my boys. We'll start on your harvest at first light, if that suits you." "Thank you," Nora said, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "There's something else," Yates continued. "I heard from town that the bank's looking to foreclose if the next payment isn't made on time." Nora's heart sank. She'd hoped to keep that worry from the children a little longer. "That's true," she admitted. "We have until the end of October." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "The Triple Bar needs additional hands for the fall roundup. Your boy John looks strong enough to help, and there'd be fair wages." "John's just a child," Nora protested, though she knew her eldest son would jump at the chance to earn money. "15's not so young out here," Yates replied. "My own pa had me working cattle drives at 14. He met her eyes. I'd look after him personally, Mrs. Vance, you have my word. The next morning, Yates arrived with 6 cowboys. They set to work immediately, their efficiency both impressive and humbling to Nora. By midday, she and Emma had prepared a simple meal for the men, who ate gratefully in the shade of the old oak tree beside the house. "Ma," John said, his voice low as he helped her serve coffee. "I want to go with Mr. Porter for the roundup. We need the money and I can work as hard as any man." Nora looked at her son James's firstborn with the same determined set to his jaw. "We'll discuss it tonight," she said, though she already knew she would relent. They needed every penny they could earn. Over the next 3 days, Yates and his men harvested the wheat, repaired fences, and rounded up the scattered cattle. Nora worked alongside them when she could, ignoring her exhaustion and the blisters forming on her hands. Each evening, Yates would share supper with the family, entertaining the children with tales of his adventures across the frontier. On the 4th day, as the last of the harvest was being stored, Nora found Yates mending the barn door. "Mr. Porter," she began, "I don't know how we can ever repay your kindness." He hammered a nail into place before answering. "No need for repayment among neighbors, Mrs. Vance. We're hardly neighbors," she pointed out. "Your ranch is 20 miles north." Yates smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Out here, that's practically next door." He set down his hammer. "John's a fine boy, he'll make a good cowhand. I'll make sure he learns properly and stays safe." "Thank you," Nora said, then hesitated. "There's something else." "The bank manager came by yesterday while you were checking the north pasture." Yates's expression darkened. "What did he want?" "To remind me that sympathy has its limits," she replied bitterly. "Even with the money from John's work, we won't make the full payment by the deadline." Yates was silent for a long moment. "Mrs. Vance, may I speak plainly?" Nora nodded. "This land is good, but it's too much for a woman alone, even one as capable as yourself." He held up a hand as she began to protest. "That's not a slight against you. It would be too much for any single person with 6 children to raise." "What are you suggesting, Mr. Porter?" "I've been working cattle for others since I was 14. I've saved nearly every penny, hoping to buy my own spread someday." He looked around at the Vance homestead. "What if I were to help you run this place? Not as charity, but as partners. I'd provide the labor and some capital, you'd provide the land and experience." Nora stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've seen how hard you work, how much you love this land, and how dedicated you are to those children." His blue eyes were earnest. "And because I believe we could make this ranch thrive together." That night, after considering Yates's proposal from every angle, Nora called the children together in the main room. "Mr. Porter has offered to become my business partner," she explained. "He would live in the bunkhouse and help us run the ranch. Does that mean we get to keep our home?" Emma asked hopefully. "If all goes well, yes," Nora answered. "I like Mr. Porter," little Abigail declared. "He showed me how to whistle through a blade of grass." "He's teaching me to rope," Samuel added excitedly. John, however, looked troubled. "What about Pa? Are you trying to replace him?" "No one could ever replace your father," Nora said firmly. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more." But even as she said it, Nora wondered if she was being entirely honest with herself. There was something about Yates Porter, his quiet strength, his gentle way with the children, the respect with which he treated her, that stirred feelings she'd thought buried with James. The following day, Yates returned with his few possessions. "Mr. Henderson understood," he explained when Nora expressed concern about him leaving his job. "Said he'd been expecting me to strike out on my own for years now." As October turned to November and the first snowfall dusted the prairie, Yates proved to be everything he'd promised and more. He worked from dawn until dusk, teaching John and even young Samuel about ranching. He built a proper smokehouse, repaired the leaky roof, and reinforced the barn against the coming winter storms. Most importantly, he convinced the bank manager to renegotiate the mortgage terms, giving them breathing room until spring. One evening in early December, as a fierce blizzard howled outside, the family gathered around the fireplace. Yates was whittling a wooden horse for Thomas, while Nora mended one of Emma's dresses. The older children were playing checkers, and the younger ones were already asleep. "Mr. Porter," Sarah asked suddenly, "don't you have any family of your own?" Yates's hands stilled on the carving. "Not anymore, little miss. My folks died of fever when I was about John's age, no brothers or sisters. That's sad, Sarah said, her 9-year-old face solemn. Everyone should have a family. Sarah, Nora admonished gently, don't pry, it's all right, Yates assured her. I've made my peace with it, and I've been fortunate to find good people wherever I've traveled. But don't you get lonely, Sarah persisted. A shadow crossed Yates's face. Sometimes, he admitted, but loneliness is just part of life out west. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Nora found Yates still sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. I apologize for Sarah's questions, she said, taking the seat opposite him. Children don't always understand boundaries. No need to apologize, he replied. She's a curious girl. Reminds me of my mother. Nora studied his profile in the firelight. You've never spoken much about your past. Yates continued looking into the fire. Not much to tell. Born in Missouri, parents died. Worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana. Saved my money, dreamed of my own land. He finally turned to her. What about you? How did you and James end up in Dakota Territory? James was a dreamer, Nora said with a sad smile. Always looking for the next opportunity. We started in Pennsylvania, moved to Ohio, then Kansas, and finally here. He was convinced this would be our last move, that we'd finally found home. And what do you think? Yates asked. Is this home for you now? Nora considered the question. It wasn't at first. I followed James because I loved him, not because I loved the frontier, but now. She looked around the small but cozy room. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. The children have put down roots here, so have I suppose. You've done remarkably well, Yates said softly. Many would have given up after what happened. I couldn't afford the luxury of giving up, Nora replied. 6 children depend on me, Yates nodded. Still, it takes courage to face each day, to keep going when it would be easier to stop. He hesitated, then added, I admire that about you, Mrs. Vance. Nora felt a warmth in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. Thank you, Mr. Porter, and please, after all this time, I think you might call me Nora. Nora, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name, then you must call me Yates. As winter settled in earnest over the Dakota prairie, the Vance homestead developed a new rhythm. Days were filled with the necessary chores of ranch life, feeding livestock, repairing equipment, tending to the small vegetable cellar, and educating the children. Evenings were for storytelling, music. Yates played a harmonica he kept in his pocket, and planning for spring. Christmas approached, and Nora worried about disappointing the children. There would be no fancy store-bought gifts this year, not with their precarious finances. Yet she needn't have concerned herself. Yates rode to White River and returned with small treasures: peppermint sticks, oranges, a picture book for the younger children, and a real leather-bound journal for Emma, who loved to write. You shouldn't have spent your money, Nora protested when he showed her the gifts in private. What else would I spend it on? He countered with a smile. Besides, it's Christmas. On Christmas Eve, as the family sat down to a simple but festive dinner of roast rabbit and the last of their preserved vegetables, little Abigail looked around the table with a frown. Where's Mr. Yates going to sit? There's no place for him. I'll eat after you folks, Yates said from near the stove where he'd been carving the rabbit. That's silly, Abigail declared. You should sit with us, your family now. An awkward silence fell over the table. John's face darkened and he stared at his plate. Emma looked nervously between her mother and Yates. Abigail, Nora began carefully, Mr. Porter is our friend and partner, but you take care of us like Pa did, Abigail insisted, looking at Yates. You check for monsters under my bed and everything. Samuel nodded vigorously. And you're teaching me to shoot, just like Pa was going to. And you help me with my sums, Sarah added. Nora saw the emotion in Yates's eyes as he listened to the children. Perhaps there is room at the table, she conceded, moving her chair to make space. That night, after the children had hung their stockings and gone to bed with visions of what modest treats morning might bring, Nora found Yates on the porch despite the bitter cold. You'll freeze out here, she chided, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Just getting some air, he replied, but she could tell something was troubling him. Is it what Abigail said? Nora asked. About you being family? Yates sighed, his breath visible in the frigid night air. I would never presume to take your husband's place, Nora. I hope you know that. I do, she assured him, but I've grown to care for those children, he continued. More than I expected to, and I worry that John resents me for it. Nora nodded slowly. John was closest to his father. He's protecting James's memory the only way he knows how. She looked up at the star-filled sky. He'll come around in time. He respects you even if he doesn't show it. And you, Yates asked, turning to face her, how do you feel about having me here, truthfully? The question hung between them in the cold night air. Nora could feel her heart beating faster. I don't know what I would have done without you, she admitted. You've saved this ranch, given us hope again. That's not what I'm asking, Yates said softly. Nora met his gaze, unable to look away. I know. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him even in the winter chill. I never planned this, Nora, never expected to feel this way. Neither did I, she whispered. It's too soon. The children, I understand, Yates said, starting to step back. Nora surprised herself by reaching for his hand. But that doesn't mean I don't feel it too. For a long moment they stood there, hands clasped beneath the vast Dakota sky. Then, gently, Yates leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss as light as a promise, as warm as hope. When they parted, Nora saw something new in his eyes, not just affection or respect, but a future neither of them had imagined months before. Merry Christmas, Nora, Yates said softly. Merry Christmas, Yates, she replied, and for the first time since James's death, the words didn't feel hollow. January brought the harshest weather of the winter, howling blizzards that buried the ranch in snowdrifts taller than a man, temperatures so cold that water froze in the bucket between the well and the house. The family spent days confined indoors, and Nora was grateful for Yates's presence. He kept the fires burning, told endless stories to entertain the restless children, and even taught Emma and Sarah how to play poker using dried beans as chips, much to Nora's mock disapproval. February brought its own challenges when Thomas developed a high fever and cough that rattled in his tiny chest. For 3 terrifying days and nights, Nora barely left his bedside, bathing his burning forehead with cool cloths and forcing spoonfuls of willow bark tea between his cracked lips. On the second night, as Thomas's breathing grew more labored, Yates made a decision. I'm going for the doctor, he announced, already pulling on his heavy coat. You can't, Nora protested. It's 15 miles to White River in a blizzard. You'll freeze to death. I've ridden through worse, he insisted. That boy needs medicine, real medicine. Before she could argue further, he kissed her quickly, their second kiss, witnessed only by the sickroom's shadows, and was gone. Hours passed with no sign of his return. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and Nora divided her prayers between her son and the man who had risked his life to save him. By dawn, Thomas's fever had broken, but there was still no sign of Yates. It was midday when they finally heard the sound of approaching horses. John, who had been anxiously watching from the window, shouted, "It's Yates!" And Doc Miller, Nora rushed outside to find Yates helping an older man dismount. Both men were covered in snow and ice, their faces raw from the wind. You're alive, she breathed, unable to hide her relief. Told you I've ridden through worse, Yates replied with a weary smile. Though not by much. Dr. Miller examined Thomas thoroughly and pronounced him on the mend. You've done well, Mrs. Vance. The crisis has passed. Now he just needs rest and plenty of fluids. He turned to Yates. You, on the other hand, have the beginnings of frostbite on your left ear and 2 fingers. Let's tend to that before I head back to town. Later, as Nora changed the bandages on Yates's ear, she said quietly, That was both the bravest and most foolish thing I've ever seen anyone do. I couldn't just sit here and watch him suffer, Yates replied, not when there was something I could do about it. Nora's hand stilled on the bandage. You could have died. But I didn't, he pointed out, and Thomas is going to be fine. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why risk so much for us? Yates looked up at her, his blue eyes serious. Because I love you, Nora, all of you. You and those 6 children have become the family I never thought I'd have. He took her hand in his. I know it's fast. I know you're still grieving James. But I need you to know how I feel. Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. Yates, you don't have to say anything now, he interrupted gently. I'm not going anywhere, we have time, but Nora shook her head. No, you deserve an answer. She took a deep breath. When James died, I thought my heart died with him. I never expected to feel anything again except duty to my children. She squeezed his hand. You changed that. You brought hope back into this house, into me. Is that a roundabout way of saying you love me too? Yates asked, a hint of his usual humor returning. It is, Nora admitted. Though God knows I've tried not to. As March arrived with its promise of spring, the relationship between Nora and Yates deepened, though they were careful to be discreet around the children. They shared private conversations late at night, occasional stolen kisses, and the growing certainty that their partnership had become something far more significant than either had anticipated. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the snowfields in shades of pink and gold, Yates broached the subject they'd been avoiding. We should talk about the future, Nora, she nodded, having expected this conversation for some time. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that I want to marry you, he said simply, if you'll have me. Despite having anticipated his proposal, Nora felt her heart skip. The children, I love those children as if they were my own, Yates said firmly, every one of them. From John with his stubbornness to Thomas with his mischief. John still struggles with the idea of anyone taking James's place, Nora pointed out. I know, Yates acknowledged. That's why I want to speak with each of them before we make any decisions. Get their blessing if they're willing to give it. Nora was touched by his consideration. You would do that. They're your children, Nora. Their happiness matters to me as much as yours does. The next day, Yates began his conversations with the Vance children, starting with the youngest. Thomas, at barely 4 years old, was easy to win over with the promise of pony rides and fishing trips. Abigail, always affectionate toward Yates, clapped her hands in delight at the idea of him becoming her new father. The twins, Samuel and Sarah, asked practical questions. Would they have to call him Pa? Only if they wanted to. Would anything change? Some things might, but his love for them wouldn't. Emma, at 13 going on 30, was more circumspect. Do you make my mother happy? She asked directly. I try to, Yates answered honestly. I hope I do. Emma studied him with eyes too wise for her years. She smiles more since you came. She used to cry at night when she thought we couldn't hear. The girl hesitated, then added, Father would have wanted her to be happy again. John was the hardest. Yates found him in the barn, aggressively forking hay into the stalls. Got a minute to talk, John? He asked. The boy shrugged, continuing his work. I want to ask your mother to marry me, Yates said, deciding directness was best with the teenager. But I won't do it without your blessing. John's fork stilled. Why do you need my permission? Because you're the eldest, because your opinion matters to your mother, and because I respect you, John. The boy turned to face him, his expression guarded. You trying to replace my pa? Yates shook his head. No one could replace James Vance. He'll always be your father, but I'd like the chance to be a father to you too in my own way. And if I say no, John challenged, then I'll wait, Yates replied simply. I won't leave. This ranch needs me, and I've given my word, but I won't marry your mother without your blessing. John stared at him, clearly surprised by the answer. You'd really do that? I would. The boy was quiet for a long moment, mulling it over. My pa was teaching me to shoot before. He trailed off. You never finished showing me how to use that Winchester. Yates recognized the olive branch for what it was. We could work on that tomorrow if you'd like. John nodded, then thrust out his hand with awkward formality. All right, Mr. Porter, you have my permission to ask her. That evening, as the first spring stars appeared in the twilight sky, Yates led Nora to the old oak tree beside the house. He'd hung lanterns from its branches, creating a warm circle of light against the gathering darkness. What's all this? Nora asked, smiling at the unexpected romantic gesture. I wanted to do this properly, Yates explained. He took both her hands in his. Nora Vance, when I rode onto your land last autumn, I was just looking to help a neighbor in need. I never expected to find a home, a family, and the love of my life. Nora felt tears welling in her eyes. I've spoken with all 6 of your children, Yates continued. Even John, they've given us their blessing. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to be a good father to your children, to protect and provide for all of you, to build a life filled with as much joy as I can manage. He pulled a small ring from his pocket, a simple silver band with a small sapphire. Will you marry me, Nora? Through her tears, Nora nodded. Yes, Yates. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her in his arms. Their kiss was different this time, not tentative or stolen, but a seal on a promise. witnessed by the stars, and Nora liked to think, approved by James from wherever he was watching. When they returned to the house, they found all 6 children waiting in the main room, expressions ranging from Thomas's sleepy confusion to Emma's knowing smile. "Well," Emma asked. Nora held up her hand, showing the ring. "Mr. Porter has asked me to marry him, and I've said yes." There were cheers from the younger children. Even John managed a small smile, though he tried to hide it. "Does this mean we call you Pa now?" Samuel asked Yates directly. Yates glanced at Nora, then back to the boy. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, Samuel. Yates is still fine." "Pa if you want, whatever you choose." "I'm going to call you Pa," Abigail decided firmly, "because that's what you are now." Sarah looked thoughtful. "If you marry Mama, will we get a new brother or sister?" Nora felt her face flush hot, but Yates just laughed. "That's something for your mother and me to discuss privately, Sarah." "When will the wedding be?" Emma wanted to know. "We haven't decided yet," Nora replied, "but soon, I think, before planting season gets fully underway." That night, after the children were finally asleep, Nora and Yates sat before the dying fire, his arm around her shoulders. "Are you happy, Nora?" he asked softly. "Happier than I thought I'd ever be again," she admitted, "but also a little scared." "Scared of what?" she hesitated. "Of losing you too, of the children getting hurt again if something happens." Yates tightened his arm around her. "I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me, no one can promise that, but I can promise that I'll be careful. That I'll do everything in my power to come home to you and those children every day." Nora rested her head against his shoulder. "I know, and that's enough." The next weeks were a flurry of wedding preparations. The ceremony would be small, held at the ranch with just a few neighbors and the minister from White River in attendance. Emma helped Nora alter her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the highlights in her chestnut hair. Abigail and Sarah gathered the first spring wildflowers for bouquets. Samuel and Thomas were tasked with keeping the yard clean and presentable, while John, surprising everyone, offered to prepare a special area near the oak tree where the ceremony would take place. News of the upcoming wedding spread quickly through the scattered community. Neighbors who had helped after James's death brought gifts, jars of preserves, handmade quilts, a rocking chair crafted by the carpenter in White River. Even Mr. Henderson, Yates's former employer, sent a fine Hereford bull as a wedding present, a significant contribution to their small herd. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect early April morning. Nora stood in her bedroom, Emma helping her with the buttons of her dress when there was a knock at the door. "May I come in?" John's voice called. Emma opened the door to reveal her brother, unusually clean and formal in his Sunday clothes, a nervous expression on his face. "You look beautiful, Ma," he said awkwardly. "Thank you, John," Nora replied, touched by the compliment from her usually reticent son. John cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, with Pa gone, I'm supposed to be the man of the family." He straightened his shoulders. "So I'd like to walk you down to the oak tree, if that's all right." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. She crossed the room and embraced her son, who was now nearly as tall as she was. "Nothing would make me prouder, John." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Yates waited beneath the oak tree, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit purchased in Rapid City. The neighbors gathered in a semicircle, with the 5 younger Vance children standing proudly at the front. When John appeared with Nora on his arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the guests. Yates's face lit up at the sight of her, and Nora felt any remaining doubts melt away under the warmth of his gaze. The minister spoke of new beginnings, of God's blessings on unions formed in love and respect. When it came time for the vows, Yates had a surprise. "Nora," he began, his voice clear in the spring air, "I promise to love and honor you all the days of my life." Then he turned slightly to include the children in his gaze. "And I make this vow to John, Emma, Sarah, Samuel, Abigail, and Thomas as well. I will be the best father I can be to each of you. I will protect you, guide you, support your dreams, and love you as my own. This I swear before God and these witnesses." There wasn't a dry eye among the guests as Yates completed his unconventional but heartfelt vows. Even John looked moved, quickly wiping at his eyes when he thought no one was watching. After the ceremony came a feast laid out on tables under the open sky: roast beef, fresh bread, early vegetables. and 3 different pies contributed by neighboring farms. There was music from a fiddle and harmonica, dancing on the packed earth of the yard, and more laughter than the Vance ranch had heard in many months. As the celebration continued into the evening, Nora found a quiet moment with her new husband. "Did you mean what you said about the children?" she asked softly. "Every word," Yates assured her. "When I first came here and saw you standing by James's grave with 6 children depending on you, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met." He took her hand, running his thumb over the new ring on her finger. "I didn't plan on falling in love, but I'm sure glad I did." Nora smiled up at him. "So am I." Their private moment was interrupted by Thomas, who came running up with a fistful of slightly crushed wildflowers. "These are for you, Ma." "And Pa," he added, looking up at Yates with a child's open acceptance. Yates knelt down to the boy's level. "Thank you, Thomas. They're perfect." He accepted the flowers solemnly, then asked, "Would you like to help me feed the horses before it gets dark?" Thomas nodded eagerly, slipping his small hand into Yates's larger one with complete trust. As Nora watched them walk toward the barn, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy and the tiny boy, she felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had led here had been marked with tragedy and hardship, but somehow, against all odds, they had found their way to joy again. Spring turned to summer, and the Yates Porter ranch began to thrive under Yates's capable management and Nora's practical wisdom. The crops grew tall in the fields, the cattle fattened on the rich prairie grass, and the children flourished in the stability of their new family structure. Yates proved to be as good as his word, treating each child according to their needs and personalities. He taught John the finer points of ranching: how to judge a horse's soundness, the best way to predict weather from cloud patterns, how to negotiate fair prices at the cattle auctions. He encouraged Emma's love of books, bringing her novels and poetry from his infrequent trips to Rapid City. For the twins, he built a treehouse in the old oak, a place of their own for adventures and secrets. He showed infinite patience with Abigail's endless questions and never seemed too tired to give Thomas one more horseback ride around the yard. By midsummer, there was another piece of news to share with the family. Nora gathered everyone after supper one warm July evening. "Children," she began, her hand finding Yates's beside her, "we have something to tell you." 6 pairs of eyes looked at them expectantly. "Come Christmas, you'll have a new brother or sister," Nora announced, unable to keep the smile from her face. The reactions were immediate and varied. Emma and Sarah gasped in delight. Samuel looked thoughtful, as if calculating what this would mean for family dynamics. Abigail clapped her hands. Thomas, not fully understanding, asked if the baby would arrive in time to get Christmas presents too. And John, to Nora's surprise and relief, actually smiled. "Congratulations, Ma and Pa," he said, using the term for Yates for the first time. The word came out a bit stiffly, but the sentiment behind it was genuine. Yates looked stunned for a moment, then deeply moved. "Thank you, John," he said simply. Later that night, as they lay in bed with the windows open to catch the summer breeze, Yates placed his hand gently on Nora's still flat stomach. "Are you happy, Mrs. Porter?" Nora covered his hand with her own. "Happier than I ever thought possible after James died," she admitted. "You've given all of us a new life." "You've done the same for me," Yates replied. "I was just a drifting cowboy with some savings and dreams. Now I'm a husband, a father of 6, soon to be 7, and a rancher with my own land." He kissed her softly. "I'd call that a fair trade." August brought a visit from the bank manager, but this time his news was good. The ranch was now officially out of debt, thanks to their successful cattle sales and careful management. September saw John start school in White River, riding in each day on the horse Yates had helped him train over the summer. October brought the harvest, bountiful beyond their expectations, and the first visible signs of Nora's pregnancy. As November's chills settled over the prairie, the family prepared for winter with a confidence they hadn't felt the previous year. The root cellar was full, the barn stacked with hay, the woodpile higher than the cabin's windows. They had weathered so much together: grief, hardship, uncertainty, and emerged stronger for it. One crisp afternoon, Nora found Yates behind the barn, working on a secret project he wouldn't let her see. "What are you building out here?" she asked, wrapping her shawl around her expanding middle. Yates quickly threw a tarp over his work. "It's a surprise for Christmas," he told her. "No peeking," Nora laughed. "You're worse than the children with your secrets." She moved closer, nestling against him as he put his arm around her. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if you hadn't ridden by that day?" Yates was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I wasn't even supposed to come this way. Mr. Henderson had asked me to check fence lines to the east, but something told me to ride south instead." He tightened his arm around her. "I'm glad I listened to that feeling." "So am I," Nora said softly. "So am I." Christmas Eve arrived with gentle snowfall that transformed the ranch into a winter wonderland. Inside the warm house, the family gathered around a small pine tree cut from their own land and decorated with paper chains, dried berries, and the few glass ornaments Nora had carefully transported from Pennsylvania years ago. After a festive supper, Yates announced he had presents for everyone, but they would have to bundle up and come outside. Curious and excited, the children pulled on coats, hats, and mittens, following him through the snow to the barn. Inside, lanterns illuminated what had been Yates's secret project, a beautiful hand-carved wooden cradle for the coming baby with intricate designs of stars and moons on the headboard. "Oh, Yates," Nora breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's perfect." "That's not all," Yates said, gesturing to 6 wrapped packages arranged nearby. "There's something for each of you." The children eagerly opened their gifts. John received a finely crafted leather saddle with his initials tooled into the side. Emma unwrapped a set of leather-bound classics she had admired in the White River General Store's catalog. Sarah found a delicate silver locket with room for a tiny photograph inside. Samuel's package contained a brass compass and a small penknife, tools for a boy on the verge of becoming a young man. Abigail squealed with delight at her gift, a beautiful doll with a hand-sewn wardrobe of tiny clothes. And Thomas, wide-eyed with wonder, discovered a hand-carved set of farm animals and a small wooden barn to house them. "How did you manage all this?" Nora asked in amazement. "I've been working on these since summer," Yates admitted. "Late nights, early mornings. The saddle I ordered from Rapid City, but the rest I made myself." "Our turn," Abigail announced. She ran back to the house, returning with a clumsily wrapped package. "This is from all of us children to you, Pa." Yates accepted the gift with genuine surprise. Inside was a framed photograph the whole family posed in front of the ranch house, taken when a traveling photographer had passed through White River in October. Beneath the photograph was an inscription in Emma's careful handwriting. "The Porter family, 1879. We saved up to have it done," John explained, a hint of pride in his voice. "Wanted you to have something special." Yates stared at the photograph for a long moment, clearly emotional. "This is the best gift I've ever received," he said finally. "Thank you, all of you." As they returned to the house, Nora noticed Yates lingering behind, still looking at the photograph in the lantern light. She sent the children ahead and waited for him. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Yates looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Better than all right. I was just thinking about how much my life has changed in a year." He carefully tucked the framed photograph inside his coat. "Last Christmas I was in a bunkhouse with a dozen other cowboys with no real place to call my own. Now I have all this, a wife, children, a home." Nora smiled, taking his arm as they walked toward the warm lights of their house. "And we have you." The baby arrived on a cold January night, with Emma helping the midwife while Yates paced anxiously outside the bedroom door with the other children. After hours of labor, Nora gave birth to a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "Meet your son," the midwife announced, placing the swaddled infant in Yates's trembling arms. Yates stared down at the tiny face in wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered. Then to the children gathered around, "Come meet your new brother." "What's his name?" Abigail asked, standing on tiptoe to peek at the baby. Yates and Nora exchanged a look. They had discussed names at length, wanting something that would honor the past while celebrating their future. "His name is James Yates Porter," Nora said softly, "after both his fathers." Tears filled Yates's eyes as he understood her meaning. "That's right," he managed to say, "after both his fathers." Later, when the midwife had gone and the children were finally asleep, Yates sat beside Nora on their bed, cradling little James while she rested. "7 children now," he remarked with a smile. When I first rode up to your homestead, I never imagined I'd end up father to 7. Nora reached out to touch his hand. Do you regret it, taking on so much responsibility? Not for a single moment, Yates replied without hesitation. That day I saw you standing by James's grave, so brave and determined despite your grief. Something changed in me. He looked down at their newborn son. I didn't know then that it was love at first sight. I just knew I couldn't ride away. I'm glad you didn't, Nora said simply. Spring came again to the Dakota prairie, bringing with it new growth and possibility. The Porter Ranch was flourishing, the fields planted, the cattle increasing, the house expanded with a new room built over the winter. Little James was growing fast, adored by his 6 older siblings and the absolute joy of his parents' lives. On a perfect May afternoon, Nora sat on the porch, nursing the baby while watching Yates work with John and Samuel in the corral. They were training a new colt, Yates demonstrating techniques with infinite patience as the boys absorbed every word and gesture. Emma came to sit beside her mother, a book in her hand but her eyes on the scene in the corral. He's a good father, she observed. Yes, he is, Nora agreed. I was thinking about something, Emma said hesitantly. Do you think father would approve of Yates, of all of this? Nora considered the question carefully. Your father loved you children more than anything in the world. His greatest fear was leaving us alone, unprotected. She looked toward the corral, where Yates was now lifting Thomas onto the gentle old mare for a riding lesson while still supervising John with the colt. Yes, Emma, I believe he would approve. I think he'd be grateful. Emma nodded, satisfied with the answer. She opened her book but paused before reading. I'm glad Yates came that day, she said simply. I'm glad we're a family again. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the ranch yard, Yates finished his work and came to join Nora on the porch. He sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, the other gently touching his son's downy head. Look at that sunset, he said, admiring the spectacular colors painting the western sky. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? Nora followed his gaze to where all 6 of the older children were now playing a game of tag around the oak tree, their laughter carrying clearly in the evening air. Beyond them stretched the fields and pastures of their ranch, green and thriving under their care. No, she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. I don't believe I have. As darkness gradually claimed the prairie, stars appearing one by one in the vast Dakota sky, the family gathered inside their home. There was supper to cook, stories to share, plans to make for tomorrow and all the days to come. And at the center of it all, binding them together through whatever challenges the frontier might bring, was the love that had begun with a chance encounter between a widowed mother and a lonely cowboy, a love that had expanded to embrace 7 children and build a future none of them could have imagined a year before. In the quiet moments before sleep that night, Yates whispered to Nora, Do you remember what I said when I first learned about all your children? Nora smiled in the darkness. You said then I'll be father to 6. Best decision I ever made, Yates Porter declared, pulling his wife closer as their infant son slept peacefully in the cradle beside them. And as they drifted toward sleep, surrounded by the family they had forged from loss and hope and courage, both knew with absolute certainty that on the wide Dakota prairie they had truly found their home.